Hello, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics. And yes, we're still in Zoom format. Today, San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo will update us on the state of the city as we continue to struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also ask him about working with the shifting majority on the city council and his views on changing the city charter. And we'll have questions from constituents about homelessness, displacement policy, and recruiting a new police chief. And that's what's coming up on Valley Politics. Welcome, everyone, and welcome San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo.
Thanks, Terry. Great to be with you.
Once again. So, Sam, the city charter requires the mayor to deliver a State of the City speech each year. Last year, you postponed your speech because of the pandemic. We couldn't gather for a speech, among other things. So you did give a speech by video at the end of the year and delivered it online. What was your primary message then?
Well, really acknowledge the enormous amount of suffering that's going on in our city right now. And I think we've suffered over the last year like we never have before. But what I really focused on was the evidence and the seeds of our rebirth, that is, in the resilience that we see throughout our community and the extraordinary feats of humanity, of selflessness that we've seen from so many of our residents who have stepped up in various ways to help their neighbors, of city staff who've innovated in various ways, and how we are really leveraging what's intrinsic in our character, both our care for one another as well as our willingness to innovate. I mean, that is what we are here in Silicon Valley. We're a creative community to really start to tackle challenges differently in a way that I think is going to not create simply a new normal, but a better normal. Ways in which we're now addressing homelessness, how we're addressing food distribution, how we're dealing with the digital divide to help thousands and thousands of our young students who have been unable to learn online who are now getting connected. So amid all the challenges, and we know there's plenty of bad news, I think it's important for us to also identify that clear evidence that we can pull out of this together and in the long run, hopefully be better.
Agreed. The community response has really been pretty remarkable. There were some very specific initiatives you mentioned in the talk. We'll come to those later, but before we get to those, where do you think we are with the pandemic right now as we come into the midwinter? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, and I know by the time this airs, we may be at a different place along that tunnel, but there is a light. The tunnel is just very long. And the good news is every week, another 15,000 people are getting vaccinated. The bad news is I think even the county would admit that's not nearly enough, not fast enough, because they're so constrained by the lack of supply right now. And so we desperately want to increase the speed by which we get through this tunnel. Because we know there's so much suffering. Obviously, we've lost more than 1,000 residents already in this county, but beyond that, the tens of thousands of families who have been unable to support themselves. So I'm very hopeful that with this new administration in Washington, and I think the governor certainly resolved to do everything he can as well to get the vaccines into as many arms as quickly as possible and to continue to support families in need through this tough time.
Last year, you put together a recovery roundtable of community leaders, and they produced a pretty impressive report and with an impressive list of recommendations. What's happening with those recommendations? Are you being able to implement them?
Yeah, these are really it's a regional collaboration, so a lot of different organizations involved. The Community Foundation has really taken a lead on several of the initiatives focusing particularly on equity. And I'm grateful for their work in partnership with a lot of folks around that table. And obviously the city is working on doing its share. What we're seeing is, I think we're having a lot of positive success in areas relating to the speed at which we're getting people off the street. That is despite what we see all around us, which we know the homelessness epidemic is as bad as it has ever been, we are able to actually move more people off the street at a higher rate than we ever have before. And I think we're making great progress on the digital divide as we never have before. That being said, we've got a lot more work to do in those and other areas.
So overall, it's been a tough year. Besides the pandemic and the economic turndown, there were the Black Lives Matter protests and controversies about San Jose's form of government. You and your colleagues have been subject to protest and harsh criticism. According to the city's own polling, resident ratings of the quality of life here have declined significantly over the last few years. What do you say to people who think San Jose is becoming a worse place to live?
Well, I think they're right about some fundamental realities in our city. And amid a pandemic, amid a recession, amid the challenges that we're facing among multiple crises, such as homelessness, there's no question quality of life has declined. And we've got a lot of work to do. I think those are all very different phenomena that have different roots. Obviously, the protests emanate from centuries of systemic racism in our country and what is a public response to that. What I encountered certainly as a mayor, and I know other mayors throughout the country routinely encountered, were protests at our home and, vandalism to our homes. I think in the case in my neighborhood, actually, we had several protests as recently in the last couple of weeks where we've had neighbors get assaulted and, violent threats against neighbors, all which have been reported to the police, assaults against the police themselves. And I think it's important we really distinguish between what's happening with Black Lives Matter, which is the 99% of folks who are standing up and saying, we want systemic change, and those very few who are instigating confrontation in ways which is obviously not productive to the dialogue and doesn't get us to any solutions. So what I'm hopeful is that we can get beyond the violent threats, we can get beyond the vandalism, we can get beyond the assaults, and really focus on the nuts and bolts. We've got a lot of work to do here in the city of San Jose, as all institutions do, I think, in addressing systemic racism. I think some of the very concrete things we can work on together, I hope, is, for example, moving the investigations of police misconduct outside of the police department to an independent agency, in this case, the Independent Police Auditor's Office. That is going to be a very heavy lift that is going to take a very significant push, I think, with the community to make that happen, because I know there'll be a lot of pushback, as there already is, from the police union. And as well as reforming the whole system of what we call arbitration, which is how police officers are ultimately disciplined. We've seen too often in this city, and way too often in cities throughout the country, where unaccountable arbitrators will reverse decisions to fire bad cops. And we need reform of that process. We need to make it much more transparent. So those are the kinds of things that we can do in a concrete way. There's a lot of talk about how we're going to change policing in this city, how we can disengage police officers from work that perhaps civilians could be better suited or better trained to do. I think there's a real openness on this council to do all those things. But it's important for us to focus on the work and not on the acts which simply incite conflict and violence in our streets. And, protest is a critical role in our society and our community. And I don't think we should conflate the protests from the incitement of conflict.
Going back to people thinking that quality of life here is declining, I think a lot of that comes from people's perception of trash and blight, which has been so much more. They seem like there's so much more. Certainly, it's become more visible.
Yeah, it has
during the pandemic. So, what's the city doing to address that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things going on that's causing that. One, much to my consternation, there was a decision made, over which I had no control, to essentially shut down a lot of the outdoor cleaning crews that we had operating during the pandemic. And I think there was what I would consider to be too strict an adherence to public health orders when clearly the law would have allowed us to engage in those kinds of basic activities such as outdoor cleaning, which of course we know can be done very safely. The second thing that was happening is that we had health directives or recommendations, I should say, from CDC and the state instructing us that we should not be moving folks around in encampments. And so I think what the public saw for the first time was just how bad our homelessness situation really is. We've had thousands of unhoused residents in this city for several years, sadly. That problem has been more hidden than people I think were aware of because our unhoused neighbors were living under bridges and they were hidden from view in various ways in the creeks. And now with a health recommendation that we not move folks around, that is now very visible for everyone. That problem is very visible for everyone to see because our neighbors are right there in front of us. And I'm hoping that spurs us to greater and more direct action. And certainly there are things that we're doing now that we weren't doing before that I think are very positive. We managed to move nearly 1,500 of our unhoused residents into permanent housing since the pandemic started. And so we're really accelerating a lot of processes. We're moving a couple thousand more into temporary shelters, and we know obviously we need a long-term solution for them. And we're accelerating the production, the construction of housing as we never have. So we've had 3 separate projects where, because we've been able to waive the red tape under emergency orders, we've been able to build prefabricated modular housing in about 1/10 the time it takes to build a typical project and about 1/5 the cost. I think that's a model for the future, right? We can show how we can move nimbly in a crisis that hopefully will help us address the broader crisis in the months and years ahead.
Well, what about you, Sam? What about you personally? It's been a tough year for you too. Protests and vandalism at your home, harsh criticism on social media, sometimes a cranky city council. Do you still like this job?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like this is the best job in government. And if you want to have an impact in your community, this is the one job, being a big city mayor, in which you can do it. Now, there's no question that there are limitations, particularly given the way our charter is structured in this city. I think people assume that as a mayor, you have the authority over a lot of things that you don't have authority for. People expected me to have the authority to fire police officers that they saw on social media who were involved in confrontations of various kinds with protesters, or they expect me to have authority over public health orders or vaccination or testing or a whole host of things that you don't have any control over. You may have influence and conversation and hopefully moving folks, but there's no question that the structure of the government needs change here in San Jose. I don't believe we have true accountability because our residents expect a mayor to be able to take certain actions that a mayor simply can't take. And when you have what may be very well-meaning, very hardworking city staff making decisions, and you literally have no authority over them unless you take it to council and get a decision a month and a half later to overturn whatever decision they made. There's a really misalignment between authority and accountability in terms of the public. And I think that's what really needs to be changed in the charter. And I would hope that we can make that change so that the next mayor can properly take the actions that mayor needs to take to respond to the very real concerns that people express.
So you and the council have just appointed a charter revision commission. I guess they should be setting to work shortly, if they're not already at work. You're hoping some form of stronger executive in the form of the mayor will come out of that, I take it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be out of office in 2 years, so it won't affect me, but there's no question in large cities, overwhelmingly, with a small number of exceptions, large cities have mayors who are able to take executive action. They're able to hire and fire department heads. They're able to direct department heads in ways that are important, particularly in an emergency like this. And I simply don't have that authority now. I need to go through a legislative process, get support on the council, file the memos, go through all the delays it takes to get something on the calendar. And that's not very nimble. obviously. And a sclerotic process like that doesn't serve you well when you're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, I think there are only two other big cities of the size of San Jose that are governed with a council manager form of government. So we'll be looking forward to, I guess we'll have to have the Charter Revision Commission folks on Valley Politics soon.
Yes.
So Sam, we have some questions from your constituents.
Great.
And the first one is from Nicole Hoang. She's a junior at Gunderson High School. Here's Nicole.
Hello, Mayor Liccardo. How has the city of San Jose been helping homeless people with shelter? And how can the current strategy of working with hotel owners be changed into a long-term one for the future and after the pandemic? Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Nicole. So just since the pandemic launched, or I'm sorry, since the pandemic has hit us, I should say, what we've seen is very rapid conversion of many city facilities to shelters, convention centers, community centers, et cetera. And working with the county, I think we've been very successful, the county, I should say, and many nonprofits in getting a lot of folks off the street, though obviously not nearly as many as we would like. The hotel and motel conversion program actually started here in the city back in 2015 when I became mayor. Something we really wanted to do to see how we could more cost effectively get people housed. And we started with a couple motels near the downtown area, and we found that we could actually do it much more cost effectively than building new housing. And since then, of course, the governor's taken on this initiative statewide, which I think is a very positive thing. The dollars that we're getting from the state will enable us to acquire more motels, and that's certainly good. And that's going to help us get hundreds more folks permanently housed, we hope. I think that construction initiative that I referred to earlier relating to the emergency and interim housing sites that we've built out now in 3 different locations is something I would really like to scale more aggressively in the months and years ahead. We're working on a 4th site now near the Guadalupe River Park, and what I hope we'll see there, and it's predominantly philanthropically funded. Peter Powell has been very generous, for example, that we're going to build this modular prefab housing for unhoused people in the Guadalupe River Park area and employ many of them in cleaning, beautifying, and repairing the park in a way in which we're really creating a core of stewards for that park. And I think that's critically important because we've seen in several programs that we've launched already, like San Jose Bridge, that having a work-first approach for those unhoused residents who are able to work has been really effective to helping people get on their feet much faster. They're able to get permanent jobs, they're able to get housing much more quickly when they have that step where they have a job immediately ready to them. Secondly, I think it conveys a really important message to the community that our unhoused residents want to be part of the solution. They don't want to be pointed to as the problem. And if we can continue to create that, I think, very important connection for our residents, that will help us generate more support for getting affordable housing built for unhoused.
It's a huge challenge, so good luck with it. Here's another question on housing. This one's from Elma Arredondo of the Alum Urban Village Advocates, or ARUVA. Here's Elma.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. Due to lingering effects of redlining on housing availability, displacement has been a documented problem in the Mayfair District and East San Jose. It is anticipated that after COVID-19 moratoriums on evictions expire, the displacement rates will explode. How can the city be an active partner to correct housing inequalities in our community and ensure developers are held accountable to building affordable housing at the lowest AMI levels to allow existing working class residents to remain in their neighborhoods in San Jose? Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Alma. The way that we've tried to address this is, first, we need to generate more resources to build affordable housing. That is rent-restricted apartments that more of our residents can afford. I don't doubt that we have many crises that we're facing right now. I do not believe that, particularly given the recession that I think we're going to be challenged with for some time, I don't believe the rate of displacement will increase in this time. I think you tend to see more displacement during the times in which there's a boom in the economy and you have more affluent residents able to move into many communities where rents are rising. I think we are seeing rents drop, although not nearly as fast in a lot of working class communities and neighborhoods like the ones I live in. They're not dropping as fast as they are in the higher end communities. But what we know is that in recessions, we will see the displacement moderate. In the meantime, what we've got to do is build out as much of a stock of affordable housing as possible. So the passage of Measure E will help. This is an effort I led. It just passed in March of 2020. It'll generate between $30 and $70 million a year we can use for affordable housing. Inclusionary housing mandates will help. This is another effort I led actually when I was on city council to mandate that developers build 15% of the units as affordable and rent restricted or pay fees. And increasingly we're demanding that they actually build them within the project. And then I think a really important change that hasn't gotten a lot of notice, but we've been really grappling with a lot of state and federal law restrictions on how we can restrict geographically who lives in what kinds of project. And what we've really pushed hard on now is enabling us to be able to choose residents who live within proximity of a particular affordable housing development to be able to live in that development. Where I think for a long time, everyone was so worried about housing discrimination laws that we were afraid to actually benefit the local community with an affordable housing project we were building in that community. And so we're pushing through, I think, some of the regulatory fear, I hope, to get to a result that makes more sense, which is if we're going to build housing in a community, that housing should be primarily for that local community, or at least preferentially there.
Our next question is from Atkinson Tran, president of the Vietnamese American Roundtable. Here's Atkinson.
Hello. What is the city of San Jose doing to ensure that the next police chief reflects the community that it serves and rebuilds its relationship after the summer's Black Lives Matter protests of 2020? Thank you.
Yeah, important question, certainly. And I think we have to acknowledge immediately that the legacy of systemic racism is something that affects all of our institutions, including obviously police departments throughout the country. And so we've got to be very assertive and direct about how we address those issues in our department. And it starts with the leadership. Contrary to the belief of some, I believe that Eddie Garcia, who came here at the age of 4 in San Jose, not speaking any English, and I think has done an enormous amount of work to help push the department forward. Before the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, got a lot of public attention. And by that, I mean with a lot of efforts around training around race-based policing, around training on de-escalation of violence, on the use of body-worn cameras. We were one of the very first departments in the country. Now, obviously, all that's not enough. We know there's still problems, and certainly we saw evidence of that when some of those issues and scandals came up around the use of social media from some current and former police officers. There's no question more needs to be done. We are undertaking an effort now to have a nationwide search for our next police chief. We're also going to look internally within our department. I think we've got a very deep bench that will help in that regard. And I think that we're through the use of members of the community on interview panels, who in our community, of course, is very diverse. I think that is going to really force candidates to very directly confront issues of great concern to our community. And racism, of course, is very chief among them. Our process this year is going to be a bit different than past years. We're actually going to have a much more public interface in those interviews. And people are going to be able to understand who the finalists are and be able to watch the interviews and understand how folks are responding to those questions. So I think that transparency is going to help considerably, particularly in giving the community confidence that whoever our next leader is in that department is someone that is responsive to those concerns.
Well, you talked about reimagining policing in your State of the City speech. So Clearly, it's going to take a police chief who's ready to work with you on doing that, which is a big challenge. Another maybe more modest challenge for you might be you're going to be working with a different city council this year. You have a couple of new colleagues. The balance on the council will shift on some issues at least, and you won't always have 6 votes you can count on. So how do you plan to cope with that?
I really look forward to working with this council. I know that there are obviously different points of view on this council and folks who feel very strongly about their positions on both sides. We dealt with a council a couple years ago that was majority Labor backed, and I think we did fine. I think my style of leadership is relatively collaborative, and we're going to do everything we can to try to ensure that we build coalitions across factions.
And I think your new colleagues are collaborative by nature, so that should help as well. So Mayor Sam Liccardo, thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Good to be with you.
We'll be back next month with an update on the state of the county with Mike Wasserman, President of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors. Meanwhile, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can also catch up on all of our previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org or on YouTube by searching for CreaTV San Jose. And now, that's all, folks. Thanks for watching.